Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 122 of the Citrix Session. I'm your host, your ringleader, gang leader. I'm not sure what it is, Andy Whiteside. Today is December 5th, 2022. I throw the date in there now, so help myself keep it straight. Screwed up a couple weeks ago, so now I'm working on that, making it better. I'm trying to improve myself, guys. That's what it is. I've got a great panel of folks today. I've got Bill Sutton, Director of Services. Bill, how's it going?
Going great, Andy.
You getting ready to buy all those Christmas presents?
Oh yeah, it's already started.
My son and I sat down and ordered some Christmas presents yesterday. It was so much easier than the old days. I'll leave it at that.
So yeah, I can remember being the single guy at 11 o'clock on Christmas Eve, running through the mall trying to buy the last minute gifts. Now I'm the married guy, pretty much doing the same thing, except I do it online 2 days before.
Yeah.
It's getting expensive, though. It's getting way more expensive. Maybe
Yeah,
it's just my kids are getting older, and what they're into is not cheap. But I did do a lookup. I wanted to find how much that Super Nintendo from back in the day was. Now my kid wants an Oculus, and
wow,
here we are.
Yeah, my son asked for a $1,400 thing the other day, and I've got one, and so he just assumed he should have one. It's crazy, especially when you like toys yourself. And Amazon Claus comes every single day. That was the voice of Geremy Meyers. Geremy is the director of the sales engineers on the East Coast for Citrix. Geremy, how's it going?
It's going well. It's going well. I just got a notification that Baker Mayfield just got dropped, Todd. So I thought you might appreciate that little nugget of info from the Panthers.
Long live the history of Baker. The myth of Baker Mayfield.
Did they play yesterday?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
They had a bye week.
They didn't lose.
They didn't lose. That's a good point.
I was so busy this weekend, I couldn't tell. I raked leaves for the 5th week in a row. I live in the woods. It's insane. I freaked out. I want to move every year this time. And then I realize how beautiful it is the rest of the year. But man, 5 weeks in a row, raking leaves, at least one weekend day. Todd Smith, Director of Sales Engineering for all of Canada. How's it going?
I'm doing well, Andy. How are you?
I'm good. Last week I was at AWS, so I didn't get home until Saturday. And holy cow, 60,000 people at a conference. I'd never seen such a thing.
It's competing with the old Consumer Electronics Show.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think that's still bigger. All the Uber drivers were like, oh, this is nothing. Wait and come back in January or whatever it is. January, December. Which one was it?
Yeah, January typically. Yeah. So I remember going out there when it was the old Comdex.
Well, in this situation, it was AWS plus the rodeo was in town. That was quite interesting.
That's funny. Now, where was it at this year?
That was Las Vegas. I don't think you could have it anywhere else. It's too big.
Fair. I'll tell you what, we did it in Atlanta a few years ago. And the thing that struck me, so Citrix had a booth, and, I'm the virtualization guy. Don't get me wrong. I love NetScaler, but, I'm the virtualization guy. And the folks who came up to me were primarily interested in networking, which I thought was pretty interesting. And then just walking around a lot of the booths, what was really exciting was just the ecosystem of what is AWS. So that's when I got my first taste of what DevOps was, and just all the little players, not the little players, but just all the players in this space. And I mean, it was data lakes and DevOps, and just the entire arena was really interesting, actually.
Yeah. I was impressed in the expo hall, all the different vendors we work with in the UC space, which, Geremy, I think you'd find that if you went this year, end user compute was very much a small conversation, but bigger than ever and bigger than I thought it would be.
It is interesting.
I think AWS has caught on to that middleware, that end user story, and how, that's a starting point for lots of other technology conversations in their ecosystem. And pandemic, right, had an impact on people needing to explore this world. But I'll tell you this, and I mean, you got too far. I was in many sessions where they didn't know what RDP was. They didn't know what a virtual desktop was. They didn't know what a hypervisor was. It's a whole new generation of people, some young, some old, that don't know what it is we do every day and act like it's just being invented for the first time. It was insane.
I'll tell you what's interesting, and I guess it's sort of a little bit of a lead into the blog post we've got today, but running Linux in Azure, the idea of standing up a Linux VDA, virtual desktop agent in Azure, you roll out a Linux machine, and you have to actually go in and install the GUI. You have to go in and install RDP and all these different steps. And I've monkeyed around with Linux over the years just on a physical desktop, and that's something I've never had to do before. And yet I find myself, tracking down the exact apt-get packages just to install GNOME. It's fascinating because you've got folks who are doing Linux in the clouds who this is not something they need, right?
Yeah.
So it's very interesting.
Well, that's part of my topic too. From last week, I was talking to a young guy. He was all about how he wanted to virtualize his desktop users, but had no idea where to even start. I'm like, okay, where you been? But he was young. He didn't know any different. And I started talking about RDP, like remote desktoping into a terminal server or something to get work done. He's like, I don't know what that is. And finally I said, well, SSH. He goes, I do SSH all the time. It's like, oh, okay, now we can talk. And he got the concept once I could tie it back to a CLI world. So our last panelist, Mr. Patrick Coble. Patrick, I assume you're sitting in Tennessee somewhere. Or are you somewhere else?
Yeah. Just got back from Wisconsin for a VMUG and then leave out in a day to Cincinnati and then Portland the week after. So yeah, it's musical cities for the next little bit.
Well, that's the life you live, right?
Yep.
So I will note, while I got Patrick in the spotlight here, Patrick does an amazing job doing VDI security assessments. If you have a virtual app or desktop environment and you don't have Patrick looking at it, or someone like Patrick, because he's probably his team's probably the only one of the teams on the planet that actually does this for a living, you need to, because the opportunity to find security vulnerabilities that nobody else is looking for inside a virtual app and desktop environment is a no-brainer that you should make sure you have that covered. Probably on a quarterly basis. Patrick, would your ideal customer, how often would they take a look at that environment?
Most people, when we do an audit, that's yearly, but sometimes it takes months to remediate. So I've had clients that it's taken almost a year to remediate because they had hundreds of findings, because we looked at Active Directory, we looked at privileged account management, and we looked at like VDI security, which is kind of the big three thing, the trifecta of success or doom, depending on how they're configured.
And do you agree with what I said just now, that your normal intrusion protection or your normal security audit is not going to be looking for the things you're looking for, at least in the virtual side of the equation?
Right. Yeah. In most cases, they completely exclude that domain, that deployment, that whole thing from the audit. And even in some big deployments that I would have never thought it would be like that is like that. And so that expertise of the VDI side to make sure that your session policies are strong and that you have SSL and TLS turned on in the right places and the right settings configured for security, gets overlooked if you did any penetration test from somebody that wasn't VDI aware.
What's the term I'm looking for? Not intrusion protection, but
what
the type of audit?
It's a vulnerability assessment or it's a penetration test.
Penetration test. I couldn't get it out.
Yeah. Yep.
And what I think is interesting about this whole conversation is a lot of times you build this in parallel virtual app and desktop presentation streaming world to get around, the normal stuff. But when you go to audit, you don't audit that stuff but yet this is the stuff you invented or created to go around the traditional stuff. And you just sit there and look at the traditional stuff over and over again.
That's right.
All right. Well, guys, the blog we agreed on today was from November 17th. It says, deliver an amazing UX with a non-domain joined NDJ. You guys were talking a while ago about that acronym, and that's the first time I've seen it, but maybe everybody else has. Citrix Linux VDA, which is virtual delivery agent in this case. Guys, why does this matter? Who's using Linux in their virtual desktop world? I'll go to Bill first, because Bill, you were talking about a project where we ran into this recently. When do we see this come up?
Well, I think when it comes to, there's really two pieces of this question. When it comes to Linux, I think a lot of it is certain industries that favor Linux. And I think this is dealt with in the article probably. The one we've seen historically in our projects is oil and gas. So we've had a couple of customers that wanted to leverage Linux workloads with Citrix virtual apps and desktops for the purposes of accessing certain applications that were written or developed in the Linux platform or on the Linux platform. And those were domain joined. So you had to install lots of things on the image in order to enable that to connect properly to Active Directory and allow for Active Directory-based authentication and things along those lines. What this is talking about is the concept of that Linux VDA, and by extension, we also, and this will come up I had a situation where we had a Windows environment where the customer wanted to access non-domain joined workloads running in the cloud, really running anywhere for that matter. So the concept of non-domain joined has really always not been around. We've always required Active Directory or some other sort of identity provider. In the case of CVAD or Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktop, it's always been Active Directory as the repository for the user accounts and all the security and such. But this concept of non-domain joined is something relatively new, I think. That's really kind of two answers to one question, but the Linux pieces, we've seen it mostly in oil and gas, but non-domain joined is a whole new ballgame.
Well, and I want to do that. I want to encourage the group to, as you talk through this, explain not only the Linux piece, but the non-domain joined piece and how it applies to the Windows world. Todd, you've got the Canadian team these days. Have you seen enough time? Have you had enough time in the seat there to see the oil and gas piece of Canada looking for this type of solution?
Yeah, a little bit, Andy. I mean, we've got obviously Western Canada has a ton of oil and gas, and it's definitely got a use case. We're seeing an awful lot in the education space as well for Linux, and it's primarily due to the cost model, right? So people see Linux as being a much lower cost alternative to giving someone a full-blown Windows environment, and with students not being joined to the domain on their devices, that could open up a lot of opportunity as well. But I think part of it is also generational, and this is where the challenge that we've got. You know, our users have actually changed some of their behavior. They're doing much more in a Linux environment because it's not always the same as the Windows. A little bit more open source driven. So we're seeing a lot more of that.
So guys, we're talking about the machine itself, the VDA, the desktop, the server that we're connecting to not being joined to the domain, but the user is in some kind of directory, maybe Active Directory and maybe not. Patrick, how does this, is what I just said true, and how does this change the security landscape?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it's right, because this is a good way for any system joined to Active Directory has inherent rights unless you have locked it down to pretty much everything in the domain. Even when we were back in the 80s and internet used to fall out the back of the cable if you didn't put a terminator on the BNC connector, same thing happens here. You can a domain computer can join a domain computer to the domain. A domain user can join it to the domain. A guest can join it to the domain. So you can have a lot of device proliferation unintendedly because of default Active Directory permissions. So if you haven't fixed those things, then you just being a member of the domain is an inherent risk to the domain. So I agree with Bill. I've seen this in oil and gas, and I've seen it in a couple banking industries too. And so they get off Windows so they don't have to worry about that, because they can ensure that they have no more extra privileges on that system other than what's allowed based on the Linux distro that they pick. So it can make a good impact. It's not for everybody. I think the most important thing that's overlooked, and I've done a couple audits on non-domain joined systems on the Windows side and a couple on the Linux, is that then those devices become completely unmanaged and they're just wild, wild west. So you still want some type of big fix, Tanium, Intune, whatever your poison of choice is, to make sure you still know what in the world that endpoint is doing, and not just make it non-domain joined and just hope for the best.
It's kind of a double-edged sword, right? Where you got you want it in the domain, so you know it's there and you know what you're trying to monitor and maintain and secure. At the same time, that gives it privileges. In the Microsoft world, it gives you access to things like being able to join it to the domain that you may not want somebody to have, which enables it's a two-way street. Geremy, would you agree that that's what you see in the Microsoft world often?
Yeah, 100%. But you know what? I think what we're also seeing is, especially for like cloud native environments, you've got customers who don't need AD. They don't need Active Directory. They don't want to stand up an Active Directory simply for, identity. They just want to stand up desktops in the cloud, and the identity they want to use is something else. Google, Ping, pick an identity, doesn't really matter. But you've got some folks who are just, they don't need it, right? So they find themselves standing up an arbitrary directory simply to support traditional end user compute. for things like Windows. And so, I think, and maybe what this article is really getting to is you got options, right? You don't necessarily need Active Directory to support this anymore. You don't need domain joined machines to provide access. So this is a fascinating article on a few different areas that bleeds over into the Windows world, even though this is specifically Linux focused.
So let me ask this question to the group, and you guys just respond as you want. Do you think Microsoft's got to the point where they see that this is part of the future and they're open to not having to control the directory and where the machines live? They just want to be part of the workloads?
They do. And if you look at their architectures around Azure AD, right? So you don't necessarily need Active Directory Active Directory backing your Azure AD accounts if you don't need to. There's a way to do it. They have hybrid AD join, but if you go look at creating and spinning up Windows machines in Azure these days, it gives you the option to leverage Azure AD as a single sign-on point. So even Microsoft understands that identity is a big deal here, and the way things have been done for 20 years is certainly changing. And so I think they very much get it.
Yeah. So guys, would you agree that so that fight over the directory where the machine lived, it's still there, but there's so many different avenues to take these days that nobody's going to go to their grave fighting over that one?
Yeah, I would agree.
So guys, before I move on, David Pisa is the author of this blog. I want to make sure he gets credit for that. We're just the guys talking about it. He's the smart guy that wrote it up. Let's jump into the next section, requirements and current limitations. Todd, you want to try to tell us what David's covering here?
Yeah, so a couple of things, right? So, you need to know a little bit about what the restrictions are, or what the limitations are. It is currently focused on DAS, right? So it's our desktop as a service offering. And you have to be using the NetScaler Gateway service. And if you're using Linux desktops, you have to be deploying them using Machine Creation Services, or MCS. So it's kind of a focused approach. There are some limitations, right? So, storefront not being supported, you have to use Citrix Workspace and the NetScaler Gateway service. And once again, you need to be able to understand that we also don't support the remote PC right now. Once again, we've got a lot of product documentation that includes this. So there's some very, very valuable links in here about where to go to find the restrictions and limitations. But the biggest thing is, understanding where what Linux distributions it covers, and what hypervisors are supported as well.
So let me ask this to the rest of the team. Any concerns about those limitations and those being showstoppers for possible use cases?
Not really. I mean, I think if this is your use case as non-domain join, let's be clear about this. With the on-premise product, we support Linux, right? And we support Linux that are domain joined. So that use case is not stopped. That works with storefront. It works with the on-prem NetScaler as well. But I think what we're talking about here specifically, non-domain join access, which, I mean, I don't know if we have a parallel on-prem outside of maybe anonymous access, maybe the closest thing, but it's sort of a new concept, and it's specifically cloud focused. So, I think for customers looking for this type of access, they're probably also looking for maybe a unique directory as well. So maybe Google as an IDP, maybe Azure AD. I don't know. It probably makes sense to be on the Citrix cloud platform just as an ease to roll out, if I'm being honest. But like I said, just so we're clear, this works on-prem. It's just not non-domain join. You can do Linux VDAs on-prem for sure.
Is this an example of something you think is going to eventually come to the on-prem version, or an example of how you can do things in the service offering that you'll never be able to do with on-prem?
Man, if I had a crystal ball there, I would love to tell you one way or the other. But I will say this: Citrix is very committed to the on-premise product, so it wouldn't surprise me. But I know nothing whatsoever.
Yeah. And just to chime in here, I think Geremy brought up a very valid point about the anonymous access. We're seeing customers across the board moving away from this anonymous access model, and I'm sure Patrick probably sees this in his security audits that he does a lot, where customers and the compliance programs moving away from allowing anonymous access. You need to be able to identify who the users are and where they're coming in from, and all the other security components. And anonymous access kind of just breaks that entire model.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, KYC laws, depending on your industry, know your customer, have been cranked up to 11. And so you as a business, in most cases, banking, retail, especially SOX, PCI, HIPAA, you can't allow anonymous access to things like that, to any type of sensitive or privileged information. So you have to know who they are. And then one point we were talking about on the Azure AD side is I stood up a client that did cloud PC. So their very first time they ever did it, just kind of a side story. But this goes to show you that Azure AD is not secure by default. They went next, joined the cloud, chugging the Kool-Aid, got their virtual desktops, had Azure AD, next. And what's its security score? What would you guess the security score is? Azure AD out of the box, never had a good configuration or bad configuration. It's a 100-point scale. Does anyone got guesses?
You know what? I'll say a C. So we'll go. I'll say 75 out of 100.
75. Bill, what are you thinking?
Probably 20, 25.
Oh, that's good. Jeremy?
That was Jeremy.
That was me. Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
I go 75.
So yeah, 75. Yeah. So
What did Bill say? 25? I'll do
Yeah,
25.1.
okay, he's doing Price is Right rules.
Playing Price is Right game.
Wait. I'm going 26.
Everyone hates that
27.
guy, Todd. Everyone hates that guy, but
So-
everyone
I'm
likes the
used to
guy
it.
who won. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's 52.78
Yes.
out of the
Wow.
box, an F, right?
Right.
And that goes to show you that Active Directory out of the box, even from Microsoft, from the mothership on the cloud Kool-Aid, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. You still have hundreds of policies that have to be configured. And that backwards compatibility of legacy operating systems is the number one reason it's like that.
Yeah.
And so it just kind of blew my mind. I was like, no way. Because it's the first time I had ever set up a new Active Directory tenant that wasn't synced from someone's old Active Directory tenant, So kind of wild. But that's where this non-domain join stuff comes in. Because if you've got an F on your AD right now, because you just set it up in Azure AD, you can have an A+ on the Linux side when it comes to, what permissions those users are effectively going to have on those systems. So it could be a good trade.
And that's just the legacy of Microsoft trying to make things doable, easier, accomplishable.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still there. I mean, still a decade or 2 decades after getting serious about security, which they have.
Yep.
But still, if you just follow the default installs, you end up in a place where you need Patrick Coble to come talk to you.
Yeah. I mean, there's just Active Directory. Yeah, we're sitting here staring at this part here, where on the page where on the Linux VDA, where you got to install your whatever UI of choice there is. This is kind of something that blew me away. I didn't know you couldn't join something to Microsoft Intune without a GUI. There's no command line interface to do that. So like if you're on Amazon Linux, Ubuntu, Red Hat, SUSE, whatever flavor of choice you pick, you have to put a GUI on there so that you can walk through their wizard to enroll the device. So you can install Intune, but it can't connect to the mothership. So if we're looking at this little line here, it's getting all the goodies done for .NET so that the VDA will be happy.
I love the fact that you've got a few different desktops. I mean, that's always been sort of the thing with Linux, is you got options there. There's actually, I think, 3 or 5 different ways you can add Linux to a domain if you need to. Like there's certain ways to do that. It's very interesting how this whole ecosystem works. Is completely different than what I'm used to.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, the idea you have to install a user UI on this machine to go. Well, so make sure. In order to do this, a non-domain joined VDA, you have to have a UI. That's what this is pointing out.
Yep.
Yes.
Todd, any additional content you want to add to that?
I think the fact that we're going back to a conversation around command line brings us back to the days when we all probably had to deal with autoexec.bat files and login scripts and all that fun stuff.
Command.bat, all that goodness.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think my Linux and AIX or Unix friends probably didn't appreciate that comment, Todd, but yes, command line. Shell.
Shell.
I kind of grew up around a Unix guy, and he made it clear earlier on that command line thing I was messing with, and NT days is not the same as a shell, which these days it is a shell with PowerShell.
Yep.
Oh, and to go back to what I just said, you got multiple options for a shell too. You got Bash, you got the regular shell. So many options.
And it goes back to what we were talking about a little bit about Microsoft and Linux in that situation. You can run their Linux. You can run PowerShell on anything now. You can run their Visual Studio Code on anything now. And you can run Linux on Windows now. So that Windows 11 desktop that we're on right now, you can run Linux on it and use its UI and command structure. So the force is strong now with Microsoft and Linux. It's going there. So I think it's because they also, want to be able to be in on that deal. So someone will still have something.
Yeah, this Linux train's coming for various reasons, and Microsoft didn't stupid. They want to be part of that. Plus now you got this Azure thing where they want any workload possible in Azure, whether it's based on a Windows kernel or not.
I think they would tell you that a lot of their workloads in Azure are probably Linux based. So it behooves them. I could use an old word. It behooves them to really invest for sure.
I mean, the site that's currently running the Citrix blogs, do you think that's a Windows box behind the scenes? Probably not.
Probably not.
And then now some end user workloads are showing up there as well. All right. So Bill, as the technical guy, and all of us are technical, but as the guy who actually has consultants out doing work, cover this .NET thing for me and why it matters.
Well, I'm not going to go into all the details because there's a boatload of them in here, but fundamentally, I think Patrick touched on it. You need .NET to install and run the VDA for Linux. So, the .NET runtime is what is it? Visual Studio or Visual C++? I'm not sure what the language is that underlies it, or if it's its own language. But it's almost true .NET. It's basically just an interpreter, right?
I said this at a conference last week because they were talking about PowerShell and how you can run it on anything now, and they were like, "Well, you can run PowerShell on anything, but you have to put .NET on it first." And I was like, "Oh yeah, so .NET's pretty much the Microsoft Java." And it was like I stabbed a couple people in the heart. They were like, "You can't say that in the same sentence." I was like, It's a universal programming language that can be obfuscated and created on other operating systems. I was like, that's the definition of what Java was. For better or for worse, it's for the better part for now. But .NETs have to get updated all the time too because of threats. So
so I think the takeaway here, Andy, is that this is it's a dependency. It's a requirement in order for the VDA to run properly. You have the same dependency on Windows. You've got to have the correct version of the .NET runtime running on that operating system in order for the VDA and other applications to run properly. And that's really what they're talking about here on Linux.
I think the big difference, right, in modern day Windows, I don't know how long this has been, but it's been a while. .NET's just on there, whether it's the updated version or not, it's a whole other question. But
right.
I don't remember having to install .NET or having, the Citrix installer kick off a .NET install in a while. Maybe I just haven't done enough of them.
Yeah, it fires it off.
It does.
Yep. And then that's the same thing now with PowerShell, right? It's like if you, depending on your operating system, it's PowerShell 5. They skipped 6 because it was just like a terrible experience for the whole world. And now everything's on 7. So if you haven't updated your PowerShell to 7, then it doesn't come down automatically from Windows updates.
Right.
So let me clarify that real quick. So when I do a server install, it installs .NET and then the VDA. When I do a client install, in other words, on Windows 10 or 11, isn't .NET already there, or am I just not?
It should be, but I think all it does is do some prereqs for it. So if you've got a fully up-to-date system, I don't think it blasts it down anymore.
Yeah.
But I think it also obfuscates a lot of that in the new installer. So it might be doing it and you just don't know.
Right.
Whereas before it did actually show the lines of it doing all these things.
I think it's there. And I think that ties in this conversation. In the server multi-user VDA, Microsoft doesn't put stuff on the server it doesn't need. Therefore, .NET's not there until you need it. And then all of a sudden you're going to need it for the VDA. But in the client OS, I think it is there. And it's just a matter of configuring it when the VDA installs. If I remember the install process right. But nonetheless, in Linux world, you got to do it. And then now you got to go out and get the Citrix virtual desktop agent. Oh, wait, virtual delivery agent. Sorry, I went old school for a minute there.
Right.
Did I use the right acronym or the right definition, Geremy?
You did.
You did. Although it is funny that it says XenDesktop VDA. So that's
yeah. Well,
that's a little contradiction, but we'll look past that.
It's baked in there. It's
Hey, we still got Dazzle in the registry, so I think we can do
Dazzle,
right.
Dazzle lives on forever.
That's
I
right.
think it's going to be like a cockroach in the Citrix world. It's going to be there forever. And I'm excited and always happy every time I see it in the registry. I love
you
it.
like that in this? Okay, so I put the desktop the user UI on. I've downloaded through some browser, I assume. I assume you guys tell me if they're actually probably going to do that through the CLI or the shell. And then now I'm doing the whole package install from
the command line. Yeah, you probably be able to. You can see that the way that package works in the Debian package manager for this. You just pull it down from its repository, so you don't have to actually do. You don't have to go to the website for anything.
And this is probably a little side joke and pretty telling about me, but when I do get a chance to work in shell, which is almost none of the time anymore, but when I was doing my AX stuff and Linux stuff, anytime I typed the command and I started seeing it do all its magical things and number and letters going across the screen, I just felt so smart.
Yeah. Linux in that sense does have a very gratifying UI when you have it right, because it's telling you what it's doing, and it's telling you with little ASCII characters and, oh, I'm at 13%, and it really is at 13% versus we're so used to Windows installers where it says 13% and that's still another hour and a half.
Right.
It's a random number generator, actually.
Totally. Yeah, exactly.
Well, back in the day, we used to install Novell products. You'd have a dot that kept working its way across the screen.
E-directory, man. Whew, that was good stuff.
I do like this one line though. So you can see what that installer does is it not only installs the VDA, but it goes and it grabs all the dependencies from it looks like we're probably running Ubuntu here, right? So we're grabbing the Ubuntu dependencies, but you'll notice down below there's a special command called sudo apt fix broken install, and it will fix your install, which is amazing. I've never had to run that, but I just think that's amazing that they've included that.
Yeah, I think that's a Linux debate. That's like, Chevy versus Toyota or whatever is what sudo does, and because it gets used so much, and it's the way to obfuscate, so you don't have to change into root. But since you use it so much, you pretty much are root. You're just not root with root. So
that's very true.
All right, guys. So help me understand this next piece where we're configuring the VDA. Am I doing this through a UI or am I doing this through?
No, that's all command line too. It's a one-liner. Yep. So that way it knows how to ET phone home to the DAS mothership.
And it says, let's see, by bypassing the local cloud connectors, the machine must have the following range of it. So what does this mean by bypassing the cloud connectors?
So in a traditional Citrix environment with like Windows machines, what you would typically, although you can do this with Windows machines,
right?
A lot of times with the Windows machines, you're identifying the cloud connectors as your brokers, if you will, and the cloud connector is going to register that VDA on behalf of the cloud, right? So it goes to the cloud connector, the VDA goes to the cloud connector to register, and the cloud connector registers that VDA with the cloud service. What we're doing here is skipping the cloud connectors altogether, and so in this case, you've got your VDAs registering directly with the DAS service. And so in order to do that, you got to have a username and password. I mean, why else would, the cloud, trust you? So in Citrix Cloud, we don't call it username and password. We call it client ID and secret. And so that's what we're creating here. And that's what you'll use on your Linux VDA as sort of an authentication piece. What's nice about this is if you're running something like MCS, which is what we're doing here, that same client username and password can be used with all the MCS images as well. So all these machines will register directly with the DAS service.
And so MCS, because this isn't single monolithic images, MCS, because this isn't, provisioning server worthy or qualifiable, or both?
MCS, so that we can do a little bit. MCS versus PBS is one question. So in this case, it's a native tool, so there's not additional pieces to set up. So we're doing MCS. But secondly, I think Patrick hit on this, right? So how do you manage non-domain machines in a scenario where you don't have a typical tool that you're going to install them to manage them, right? So in the Windows world, we'd have group policies. Well, now we're non-domain joined. How do we manage this? So we can still do single image management of non-domain joined machines. So we update and patch once.
Yeah.
All of my linked images, they all get it.
Yep.
Is that because, so I totally get that. And I understand provisioning services and its magical Active Directory related stuff it did. So forget about that for a minute. But I need to use MCS if I want image management. I couldn't do this on standalone machines, or I could.
No, I don't. I think you have to use MCS because I don't think this is. I guess you could not use it. Well, no, you would, because even if you did persistent desktops, as soon as you make that machine catalog, it's going to walk you through all that. So, yeah, and then that way everything's a clone of each other. So just like he said, is you get that patch done once and then you roll it out, you're done for all. But it just means you've got to pay attention to it. And honestly, in some cases, Linux, depending on how you do your packaging, can stay up to date and more secure than Windows, because Windows will only update Windows, right? So if you don't have Patch My PC or some other third-party patching thing going on, it's not going to patch that Adobe and that other application, the other application. Whereas when you do apt-get or yum update or upgrade on any Linux box, it updates every single thing that's installed, every package, every dependency, every little doodad. And Windows doesn't do that by default.
Mm-hmm. And Andy, let's not forget, if we're doing this in a cloud, if you're doing that full desktop, now we can turn on auto scaling. So if I've got dedicated desktops, then that means for all 100 users, I've got 100 machines that, for a good user experience, I got to predict when those users are going to be on so I can power it on appropriately or on all the time. And it gets very expensive. Where in this case, we could do a pool desktop, even the Linux machines, and just scale up, scale down as we need to. So we can potentially just reduce that cloud spend if we need to.
Yeah. So just for my clarification, we're talking about pooled, non-persistent images. Could you, and you guys may not know the answers, but could you do persistent, pooled, not pooled, but assigned MCS images where the differencing disk lived on until you updated the image and it would break it all? Or did that even make sense?
I know you can on site in the classic deployment because I've done it. So you can do that there. And I would guess you'd probably be able to do it here. I think this is showcasing the DAS portion, which would definitely probably be more in line with that non-persistent side, but it should still be able to do the same dance, I would guess.
Yeah. And so, yeah, go ahead, Andy. I'm sorry.
What I'm bringing up is kind of a very corner case and probably almost stupid to bring up, but that's where my mind went. So sorry about that. Geremy, go ahead.
No, I was going to hit on that one graphic you got right there. So, what we're doing in this particular instance is we are registering this Linux VDA directly with the DAS service, but we're brokering the HDX session through the cloud connector. What you see later in this article is, I think we're probably going to run out of time. We can also do this completely connectorless if we need to, which means not only can we register directly with the DAS service, but we can bypass the connector as well if we're using Rendezvous version 2. Which is a protocoling that we use with the VDAs, and just bypass connectors altogether.
So the next section here goes into setting up the runtime environment, MCS configuration, how they're stored, where they're stored. But what if anything do we need to, for our listeners, highlight in this section about the runtime environment?
You have to do it exactly right, or it will not work. Attention to detail is a must. No extra
Patrick,
characters. Choose your correct text editor. Good luck.
But Patrick, does this make your skin crawl as a security guy for standard installations? Leave everything as their default values. Is that okay? You okay with that?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it does. It's kind of the nature of the beast a little bit. And so, yeah, I mean, the good thing is in many cases, this stuff can't work unless it's perfectly configured. So if you mess up on one of these lines here, then it's not going to do its dance.
So Patrick, do you ever do a project and then turn around, come back the next day and offer an assessment and go find all the things little nuggets you left behind for yourself?
Yeah, usually I try not to leave too many nuggets, but the thing is Microsoft and Citrix and VMware and pretty much every technology company makes new nuggets all the time. So I pretty much always have to be watching kind of the cybersecurity news kind of thing and the patches that come out for the operating systems to try to understand what the next thing is.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got our template created, shut down, and now we're going through creating the catalog and the delivery group. Bill, you want to kind of just walk us through anything special about this piece?
Well, if you scroll up a little bit, I found an interesting item. You go up a little farther, just at the bottom of the prior section. It said that the Linux VDA is configured by default as a multi-session machine. I thought that was an interesting nugget there. You have to manually or specifically set it if you want it to be a VDI-oriented workload. I don't know if anybody has any insight into that, but I thought that was interesting. And then that relates to the section we were just going to discuss. It looks like they set it up when they go through the MCS process in this article. They are setting it up as a multi-session machine.
So right, Linux, Unix, and then Linux, those were multi-session machines, multi-user machines from day one. Believe me, my Unix friends at my very first IT job like to make fun of me over that because I didn't even know what they were talking about at the time. Now I do. But I guess Linux, it makes sense. Linux by default is multi-user. Always has.
It is. Yeah, that's what it is. Yep.
So when you go through the wizard that you're talking about here, the creating a machine catalog and related delivery group, this is very standard stuff, with the exception of the last screen there, which is the machine identity. Obviously you're starting off with your machine type, you're setting MCS, selecting the image, and then where you presumably would have taken a snapshot or something that you would leverage for that. But then it gets down here to machine identities where you select non-domain joined, and then of course give it the naming, and then it runs through the magic that it always does in Citrix and creates the machines, the number of machines you requested with the name you requested.
Yeah. Guys, any additional content or comments on this section?
Standard goodies.
Yep.
Standard goodies. Yeah. I would just say, because I just looked this up, I wasn't sure, but there's a section when you're doing this with Windows where specifically with non-domain joined machines, you're going to manage this with WEM as a way to push policies out to the VDAs. Mm-hmm. I'm not seeing that WEM supports Linux, so that could be something to be aware of.
Yeah, I don't think it does.
WEM being workspace environment management.
Workspace environment manager. Yeah. So, but like we said earlier, you might manage Windows VDAs that are non-domain or that are domain joined with group policy. If they're non-domain joined, how do you push out configuration settings and things like that? And you can do that with Windows Environment Manager. For Windows VDAs, doesn't look like it's supported for Linux though.
So you're probably going into the actual template and making your setting configurations there, right, Patrick?
Yeah, totally. Well, in some cases, that's kind of you may want because you want this to be kind of like air gapped from other systems. Maybe one of the reasons you're doing this, so that with absolute every machine is the same and they're all just like this. There's no automatic thing changing stuff. So it just means that updates, you've got to have a lot more attention to detail and stuff like that. But, you can still do some cool stuff.
Yeah. Okay. I will highlight the little screenshot here, which I think for me, it helped visualize. The machine is not domain joined, but the user has some type of directory it's responsible for. That requires Active Directory, or it doesn't matter at that point. I think we kind of covered it earlier, but I'm just kind of validating.
It doesn't matter. Yeah. So it looks like there's an identity of some kind, but it doesn't need to be Active Directory based. Could be any identity that's supported by Citrix Workspace, actually.
If it's non-domain joined, it's probably a local identity. At least I know it is in the Windows world, right, Geremy? Well, when you log into the desktop, it's creating a local account. That's how I should frame it, as opposed to an identity.
That is correct. That's correct. Yeah, it's logging you in. It's got to log you into Windows somehow, correct?
Right.
So it's creating one on the fly. Mm-hmm.
So the next section of the blog kind of goes through once you're in there, if you want to either go validate yourself or go show off for your girlfriend, jump in there and start proving that you've done what you set out to do. And then the next section, I'll go to Todd on this, making things scale with Rendezvous v.2 protocol. Maybe Todd, just a quick recap on Rendezvous we touched about a while ago, but then how does this help us cover the scaling part?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing it's going to add in as far as value goes is Rendezvous was designed to kind of eliminate the need for constant going back and forth through the cloud connectors. So once you establish that connection, it allows you to go and eliminate those extra hops as much as possible.
And that gets me out of single points of failure around cloud connectors and.
Yep.
Yeah, I think the original rendezvous protocol V1 was designed to enable the actual ICA HDX traffic to go directly from the gateway service to the VDA, but the control traffic still went through the cloud connector. So the concept of assignments and generating the icon or generating the file that's needed to make the connection. Rendezvous V2 essentially has the VDA communicating directly with the cloud control plane versus the cloud connector. So in most cases, or in theory, and perhaps in practice, you could eliminate the cloud connectors altogether because the VDAs are communicating directly with the control plane. I should qualify that. The only question in my mind, and particularly in this article, is whether the cloud connectors are still required to enable communication with if you're dealing with on-premises or perhaps even cloud, to communicate with the quote-unquote hypervisor. And I don't know that that's needed.
I think if you're on site, the answer is yes.
Yes.
And then if you're in the cloud, no.
Yeah, you're leveraging AWS or Azure orchestration directly.
There's some peering stuff between the Citrix Cloud Broker and all the other clouds, so that you can just click next.
Right.
Yeah. So if you're on site, you still got Connectorpotamus, but now you've also got that Linux Virtual Appliance, which actually does a really good job,
right,
and saves you some headaches of things to patch and maintain as much because it takes care of itself pretty good.
I mean, Bill, if you were completely in one of the cloud infrastructures, you could get away with just having your VDAs in that cloud footprint, and that's it. No connectors, no Active Directory. It could just be desktops in that location.
Yeah,
in fact, it would feel a little arbitrary standing up a resource location because there's nothing that you would put in.
There's no cloud connectors there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Guys, this is such a geeky, awesome conversation. But we're running out of time. So Todd, you want to take us home with the conclusion as to, I'll come around the horn, but why is this important? Why does it matter? Why do we cover it?
Primarily because there's some new use cases that are coming out from customers who would traditionally avoid a desktop as a service offering because it didn't provide the flexibility that you get with Linux and the cost savings associated with it. I mean, think about industries where you're spinning up a lot of different resources for very small, minute, well-defined tasks, where Linux is a really good alternative for them. And it's something that they can control.
Do you think we look up in 10 years and it's like close to the default, if not the default?
Could be. And especially as we're starting to see more and more of these small form factor purpose-built devices that are out there. I mean, think about it now. I mean, a lot of the gaming consoles are moving off of they were either never on a Windows-based platform or they're moving off a Windows-based platform towards more of a Linux open source type of environment.
Yeah. Yeah, that was AWS last week, like I said, and I sat at a table one time with guys that said they hadn't been on Windows in over 10 years. They were developers, so that makes sense. But, it's coming. There's more and more use cases, more and more users that are going to be like that.
Yep.
Geremy, anything we left off here you'd like to make sure we point out before we let you go?
No, but I will add on to what you just said with Todd, right? So I think we like to live in a binary world where is it all Windows, is it all Linux? I mean, I think it's like the cloud conversations we're having now, where it lands somewhere in the middle. Customers don't go all in cloud, especially folks who have traditionally had an on-prem footprint. They land somewhere in the middle. It's the use case that drives the actual technology, which is fine. I'll be honest, like on the East Coast that I cover, I don't quite often see Linux VDA as a big use case. But there's a lot of parallels to this article and what I'm seeing customers do. In fact, Bill and I this last week, we basically did a POC for a customer where it was the same thing, but with Windows. It was basically no Active Directory, no connectors. They wanted auto scaling, pooled desktops. They wanted it all backed with an identity that wasn't Windows based and go. And to be honest, we were able to cook this thing up and make it work. And it wasn't that hard. So it was pretty impressive how far we've come and the fact that these tools are already in place, that if that is your use case, you can do that today and you're completely supported.
Yeah. So Patrick, how about you? Anything we didn't cover you'd want to highlight or maybe add on to this conversation?
No, I think this is good. I think we've pretty much hit a lot of the points. I think if you're in a position where this could make sense, this is one of those options that Citrix has that other VDI vendors don't. And so this is something you really have to look at. And this is where I get excited about Citrix because of its flexibility. And this shows that flexibility and that innovation and being able to come up. And this could have came from literally 2 or 3 clients telling Citrix, knocking on the door like, hey, we need this. And here it is at our doorstep. And that's what I've always kind of loved about the innovation. And it's not that, VMware or WorkSpot or LeoStream or, Microsoft don't do those same things, but it's great to see it working and see these cool features. Well,
this could be foreshadowing as to what they expect out of Citrix over the next 5 years now that some other things have happened and they're going to go back to put more emphasis on this space.
Yep. Agreed.
All right. I think we lost Todd, but Bill.
I would really just echo what everyone else says. In my view, when I read this, the Linux VDA conversation, there's a lot of detail in this article about that, and Linux certainly as a target for use to deliver applications or desktops is there, and we've seen it at XenTegra. But I think the big identifier, the big part of this article is the whole concept of non-domain joined, and being able to leverage that not just for Linux, which is what this article is all about, but also for Windows and potentially other environments where customers maybe just have Google Identity, maybe they just have Azure AD, and being able to leverage that to deliver a workload to their users. I think that's the key, or perhaps the most important part of this.
Yeah, Linux or not, I think a world of Windows that's not domain joined, but is still managed is
correct.
A big part of the future.
Yeah.
I think device management is going to be that thing that's 10 years. I do a lot of, obviously security stuff. And so I deal with a lot of insurance companies and doing cyber risk assessments for their insurances. And that device management is going to be there just like multi-factor authentication and endpoint protection and a SIM and a backup solution. Like that's going to be one of those 5 core things that you have to have.
Exactly.
Maybe that's one of the reasons why Citrix is bringing back that part of their story.
It could be.
All right. Well, gentlemen, thank you for your time. This was really good conversation. Hopefully our listeners will appreciate it, and we'll do it again next week.
All right.
That's good.
Thanks, gang.
Later,
Thank
Gators.
See you guys.